This can't be fixed. Worthless. Junk. Oh well. Time for some modding.
So here we are at long last with the modding video and internals guide on the Buzz Bee Mutator. Now, I'm going to go ahead and right off the first mention that I know a couple of you have been looking specifically forward to this video, and namely D-Ben, and I'm also going to mention Buff Daddy Nerf of the Blaster Hub blog. He has done his review finally of the blaster, including some internals photos. Now I'm going to be going over the internals in the video, but if you want photo format, I'm going to try to remember to put that in the pinned comment on this video so that you can find his photos on the Blaster Hub blog. I don't mind giving him a shout out because he provides good reviews that are unbiased and provides very good information for those of you who are looking to either tinker or mod, and therefore I'm going to put that in a pinned comment or the description. Be sure to check both. But this is the Buzz Bee Mutator. It is not a snipe replacer. It is in addition to it. It retailed for $35, and it is a dual magazine fed bolt action spring powered blaster. I gave it a good review back in the summer and been using it off and on again since then. I think the thing is fantastic and has a purpose. The purpose of the dual magazine is that you never run dry. If you need to change out mags, okay, it came with two 10 rounds, but I've ran it with two 22 round worker mags, so total capacity of 44, and when this one's empty, pull it out, slap in a new one, and then pull that back, swap to it, chamber your next round, and go firing. Pull out the now empty one from the front mag well, switch it out, throw it back in. You still were at the ready with this mag. Very useful function. But the thing is that all of this mechanism, while I personally have used it and it's proven extremely reliable with not a single fault or failure in the time since I've used it since back in the summer. Now that's been months ago. No failures of any kind. It does take up a lot of shell space. I mean, you can see it there. Which, kudos to Buzz Bee for including windows on both sides. Very neat to see the function. But that's a lot of space used up, whereas something like the snipe uses up a lot more space in the back end, and that's why the snipe will get around 90 feet per second stock. This loses about 10 feet per second or so. Stock form, around 80 feet per second. The Buzz Bee standard. Buff Daddy Nerf, he said he got 78 with the Precise Pros and 81 with the long distance. That mirrors what I got. I averaged all over 80 feet per second or a little above with a mix of darts. So now, what can we do to make this thing perform better? Well, I'm going to do a quick teardown and we'll see. Okay, we're going to quickly fast forward to here where I've spared you the bore of watching me undo everything. The stock is just simply hooked and attached with this point here. So press the button, hinge it back, and remove it. In total, we're going to do a quick breakdown. You had 2 screws in the separate rail, which does come off separately. I like that Buzz Bee's doing that. You had 2 in the foregrip. Neither are hidden. You had this little pop-off piece off of the back of the pistol grip. Again, no screws in it. I just pry it up with a little flathead screwdriver and it'll pop up and over. It's actually just sitting snapped onto a lip there. No solvent welding. The mechanisms are all on the left half of the shell, so remember that. So after you take your screws, before that you pull the shell apart, roll it over onto your workbench, and then put the bolt in the up position. Don't prime it, just put the bolt in the up position and lift off your shell half. That's all I've done here before bringing you guys back. We'll set that shell half off to the side, and that gives you a direct look at the mechanism. Now, as you'll see, here we are with the internals. Your dual mag wells with the double, I'm just going to call them spring-loaded dart guides. They're just there to help align the darts at the top of the magazine. You've got that, and this down here will be your lock unit. I am definitely going to want to remove this, because I will want to deprime this after putting in my typical, I mean very typical at this point, if you guys watch my videos, 7 kilogram spring. I don't know about advising going anything above a 9 on this. The typical failure point, and I have seen this happen, for Buzz Bee bolt action is, well, the bolt. Not the actual handle itself, but the piece here. And until I find a machine shop that I can set up, which I am planning to do for some snipes, I'm going to see about getting a machine shop to set up and get specs on reproducing a expanded plunger tube bolt action snipe internals kit. I'm going to do a few for myself. It'll probably be extremely cost prohibitive, but I am going to do that in the spring. And that could be a possibility here, just to get this piece here made out of steel or aluminum, because weight doesn't matter there. But what we're going to do is, as you can see here, we have a almost Predator style, no tube, no actual hose going from the plunger tube back to the back of the breech, but it is a separate unit, which explains some of the inefficiencies. Looking here, you have a decent sized plunger tube. It's way bigger than a Retaliator plunger tube, but not quite snipe size. And then the trigger mechanism here, all the way back here, is your typical Buzz Bee catch. That is the standard catch. It looks a little different, but it's the same design, just a vertical catch plate. And then here is the spring. Very easy to get to. You don't even, if you're just going to do a spring upgrade, I don't think you need to disassemble anything else. Let's see, we have 2 screws to access to remove the plunger head. Oh, and by the way, number of screws in the shell, 13, all the same size. Not counting the 2 in the foregrip or the 2 in the tactical rail. Those would bring the total up to 17 screws in total on the shell. But 13 in the shell, 2 in the foregrip, 2 in the rail. Now, I do not want to lose that. Is that the same size? No, that's a slightly shorter screw than the shell screws. Okay. That would be very, very convenient, because if for some reason you happen to lose one of these, if it was the exact same size as the shell screws, you could always sacrifice a shell screw to replace that. There is our plunger tube, or plunger rod, disassembled. Plunger head is actually removable. Very nice. Just pull that off, and we're going to take a quick look at the plunger rod for strength. Now that is a full I-beam. So that's actually not bad. It looks like it's going to be able to take a little bit of use, and if you had to, you could drop in some, say, aluminum strips in there and epoxy them in for more reinforcement if you needed to. So okay, that is a viable plunger rod. The plunger head does have some dead space. And again, you could put a reinforcement back here with slightly longer screws going through the aluminum if you wanted to reinforce this. You could cut out a piece of aluminum to fit right in there and put the screws in through this side. I think, could we do that without interfering? You'd still want them to come in through this side, but it looks like if you trimmed it out to fit all the way around that, it wouldn't interfere with these two going together too much. No. Okay. And of course you could always put them on this back side, go through, and they would take that aluminum piece would take the brunt of the force. So yes, very much a good design, it looks like. And yes, I know, I'm Buzz Bee biased. Let's actually pivot this up and out of the way. And see what it's going to take to remove our lock mechanism. It looks like there's not going to be any issues to removing that. And let's take a look at our breech. That is one heck of a long breech. That is amazing. It does have the air restrictor right up here. So this is going to just be all empty tubing. Okay, I do think a limiting factor of this design will be here at that junction. That's not an efficient flow of air. It's got to make multiple 90-degree turns to there. And it does have an O-ring that slides over. Seems to seal up well enough. But that is going to be one of the inefficient points. Okay, well, you guys don't know how long I've been out here at this point. I'm going to make sure to cut everything out. But this breech, not only was it the longest that I've ever worked with, of course, complete total is that length there. Let me grab a quick tape measure, lay this down here. As you can see, I did have to split the breech. I found a point where it was put together and split it there. And from the, well, total length, including the bolt, is, and all the way up to the dart guide, is 11.5 inches. For the actual airflow length, that's from the little vent forward, is 8.5 inches. That is rough. But that is from this point here to the exit of the breech. Now I did have to split it because, as you can imagine, this is where the where I thought the air restrictor was going to be mounted. I thought, okay, there was a line right there. I was like, and there's one here as well. I was like, okay, this is where the air restrictor was put in. This little section, this little segment. I couldn't have been more wrong. The air restrictor was mounted all the way back to here. I was cutting out pieces of white air restrictor, drilling it all the way down to here. Now, could it have been getting pushed? Yes. But that air restrictor removal was one of the hardest. And yes, it did get a little chewed up when I took it apart. So what I'm going to do to solve this is to make sure that I put a brass sleeve in here along with my breech. I may just do it all as one piece. I've got enough brass to make that happen. But my plan is maybe brass breech extended on long enough to go into here. And yeah, that's going to be a lot of brass, but thankfully I got some patrons who have put in enough that I'm going to be able to order some more brass. So I will probably use up the rest of what I've got here on this. But you could go and get away with just a short brass breech, and you could even do a you could even slide in some tubing of other sorts, a little bit less expensive if you need to, CPVC maybe, because that's a lot of just empty air volume for the length of that. But there's no way around it. But I just want to let you know that's how I plan to fix it. It was I split the breech right there, and make sure you put little marks there to where you can line it back up properly. Otherwise, you could accidentally go slightly sideways, one way or the other. But I will put this back together. And if you do forget to put a mark, all you have to do is take and line it up to this. The bottom of the breech has this little notch right here. It has a little notch right here. And you can make sure to line that up with this inlet. And before you put the breech back together, make sure you slip this on oriented properly. That would go this way to line up properly. I would hate to actually have this reinstalled with a brass coupler and be ready to go and then, oops. Because this does not come apart unless you were to pull this big pin. I wish that this was a bolt. It's not though. I mean, it's a bolt action, but that is a pin and I don't want to pull that. But I do wish that that was removable, because otherwise you can't also slide that over this. I wish you could, but because that's important. That is important there. Don't trim it off, because that's important for your dart alignment out of the magazine into the breech. But let's move on. I will brass this thing up and come back. I'm going to use a 5.5 inch long piece of brass. I want to make sure I have a good connection. Got to come all the way forward to here, for those of you who just want to do a simple brass breech. But I want also to make sure I have at least a couple inches to protrude into here for stability. I don't want this to be a weak failure point. But I'm going to go ahead and I started to do my bevel. I'm going to go ahead and finish my beveling right here. I'm doing it off the workbench so that the shavings fall to the floor where I can sweep them up. And there's the nice shiny beveled edge all the way around. And now I can actually put the flare on it like I always do. And that's actually visible. That little trumpet style flare. We'll do that. And now I need to ream that out a little more, and I'll assemble it off camera so that you can see it. I will put a touch of epoxy to the back end. Anything will work, any kind of adhesive, because the main thing is don't over ream this out. If you ream it out with like a round file like I'm going to do here off camera, if you're doing that, don't overdo it. Test fit it and get it to where it's still a nice firm press fit. And a lot of times that's about all you're going to have to do. But I will epoxy this back end that's going to go into here because I'm using it as a coupler. And I want this to be a very firm connection point. Okay, bringing you guys back here all the way after I've gotten a number of steps done, including getting the breech assembled. I did use my marks, and I installed a 5.5 inch section of brass that I actually flared a little bit on this end in the end, so that it had a really good air seal, and I actually had to really push it down in there. Cleaned everything up, epoxied it in on this end and all over on the joint, and I do believe it's got a very secure connection because the brass is all the way here is the cut, and that extended the brass all the way back a little over 2 inches into the rear portion of the breech. And went ahead and did my little bumper that I make out of hot glue. It also fills in the dead space there on the plunger head. So, and I'm used to calling this, back in my previous job where I was a hydraulic sales rep, this would have been the piston. And the piston, you want to keep it as light as possible. We call it a plunger head here for Nerf, but this you want to keep as light as possible, but hot glue works good enough. You could also, as a tip, you could also epoxy on a bit of hobby foam, and I have done that, but the hot glue works. As it hardens, it becomes almost like a rubberized bumper. And as you can see, if it were to impact the front of the plunger tube, this would hit first. And I went ahead and E-taped underneath the seal, and I put the O-ring back on. It has a very nice snug fit now. And I'm going to install a very typical NF Strike 7 kilogram spring. I'm out of my 8 and 9 kilogram. Well, the one I use from NF Strike is an 8.2 kilogram, which is pretty nice spring overall. I've actually used up all the ones I had in blasters that you guys didn't really even get to see, because I actually mod other blasters and give them away. Gave a few to coworkers and whatnot, and I didn't necessarily feature those in the channel, but I had used a 8.2 kilogram spring, and fortunately I got those to test, and I never once tested one. They all went in blasters that I gave away. But this is the spring out of the Mutator. Here is a NF Strike Retaliator spring. You see that the spring from the Mutator is actually pretty good. It's not at all wimpy, but it is a Retaliator size spring. It's actually maybe even a little bigger. And that's something that remains to be seen, how much performance gain we're going to get out of this. Because just by doing the field test, that doesn't feel very wimpy. Some springs do. That one feels pretty substantial. But this will be what I use for now, and we'll see what the performance is with it. But I'll go ahead and install this, and then you guys can come back here in a second. Okay, newsflash. The spring on the Mutator is not the standard Buzz Bee spring that you expect, which is basically a Retaliator spring, only slightly longer, which normally means you can just slap in any Retaliator spring that you want, and it'll be a nice upgrade. However, when I attempted to put a Retaliator spring on this plunger rod, this thing is beefy. That's a good thing. But however, that means that there's not enough room for a Retaliator spring to go over this I-beam shaped plunger rod. It just snags and catches and drags on it. The stock Mutator spring is not only a little longer, and I mean, Buzz Bee springs tend to be about 1/8 to 1/4 inch longer than a Retaliator spring. This one's actually wider in diameter. It was very noticeable when I put them together. So I dug around, found a whole bunch of different springs to try, and don't laugh, but what I actually had found to work was a leftover Buzz Bee Sentry spring from a mod I did months ago. And I have actually stretched it out to get close, and it's so large in diameter, it actually fits completely over the Mutator spring. The inner diameter of the Sentry spring is so large, you don't even have to nest them. It sits over it. And the greatest thing I found was that it's actually still small enough to fit inside the plunger tube. That's a big plunger tube. Big diameter-wise and lengthwise. But I'm going to try this and see if it'll catch. And if it will, I'm going to leave this segment in and we're going to go from there. Because this spring, and the closest thing, the Sentry spring is the closest thing to a Sentry spring is a strong arm spring, which a lot of you people out there might have. So we're going to take a look and see if this will work. Okay, all said and done. Took me a little while to get at least some decent readings on the chronograph because that barrel is huge compared to the opening on a chronograph. So unless it's perfectly aligned, this thing gets hit a ton. It's going to be high time for me to get a better chronograph in the future. That one's accurate and precise, but the dealings of having to make sure you aim through that are a problem when the barrel is twice the size of this thing. But complaining of that aside, this actually worked. The fitting of the Sentry spring over the stock Mutator spring actually netted an average of around 115 feet per second. That was pleasantly surprising. I had shots ranging all the way from around 100, and I had some that I wouldn't really necessarily put any kind of hard claims on that actually shot all the way over to 140. But what I seen, the bulk amount was around 115 or so. Not bad for literally a blaster that is operating. The main change I made to it was the brass breech. Getting rid of all airflow issues. That's the main change. Of course, I did get rid of the locks and did the little padding of the plunger. The plunger head, which is also a small dead space remover. But doubling up the spring there worked quite well. And keep in mind, Buzz Bee Sentries, at least last I checked, were going for a retail price of $5.99. At least locally here. That is as cheap as a lot of springs. And also to keep in mind, the closest Nerf spring to that is the strong arm. So that opens up some options. I could actually do this again and take it apart and try it with a 4.5 kilogram strong arm spring that's been stretched to fit. And while most people are against stretching of springs, because eventually that will cause them to get weaker quicker, you can go to NF Strike and get a strong arm spring very cheaply, and that would be my recommendation. This is just the stock Buzz Bee Sentry spring, and the strong arm spring that I had there in the package was 4.5 kilogram. That's what I upgrade my Sentries with when I mod them. So there's an option. I don't have another one of those on hand to do, but I will in the future probably do just that. Throw in a strong arm spring of 4.5 kilograms over the stock Mutator spring and see how that does. But as it is, this blaster is actually working quite well on the double spring setup. 115 feet per second isn't groundbreaking, but it is usable. And it's still a very light prime. I can even do it here on the bench. The only thing you're priming is back here. And I'll brace it, and voila. Now, with the locks removed, I can deprime it. And, as you see here, 222 worker mags. I can walk around with 44 round capacity. Fantastic, and this is kind of an odd way for Buzz Bee to have made a blaster to compete with the X-Shot Turbo Advance. And in the end, this is one way to get some more performance out of it. Brass that hugely long breech, and throw a Buzz Bee Sentry or Nerf Strong Arm spring over the stock spring. And that's good enough. It's still a smooth enough prime not to fuss with. But this is Mongoose Jake with my Buzz Bee Mutator mod guide with internal guide as well. Hope you enjoyed it and hope it was helpful. Thanks for watching.